everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Mike Posey. I'm the mayor of Huntington Beach, and this is the first of 4 proposed town halls. If you remember back on December the 4th, I brought this up. I wanted to increase communication to you and specifically talk about maintaining a common theme, which is regain and retain local control. And this is the first of the town halls, which is going to focus on the housing bills package passed in Sacramento. There are about 15 of them. And most of those bills really seek to wrest local control away from us. So if we want to be sure that we are in control of shaping how Huntington Beach looks like or will look like, it's worth understanding what the impacts of these bills could be. So we've assembled a pretty good panel of experts. I'll start with Heather Stratman. She's the CEO of Association, that's a mouthful, I was going to say ACCOC, but nobody knows what that is. It's Association of California Cities of Orange County. And next is Corey Williams from Townsend Communications, and Michael Ron from National Core. So we're going to start with a little bit I think we're going to start with Corey, right? And it's a legislative update. We'll go right through most of the bills. Then we'll have a presentation from Heather, and we'll talk with Michael, and then we'll do some Q&A. So that's kind of why we changed the format a little bit, so we can allow some questions and answers rather than one-sided statements. So instead of just talking to us, we can answer back. So anyway, let's get started. Take it away, Corey.
Thank you. I'm Corey Williams, Southern California Director with Townsend Public Affairs, and as the mayor mentioned, we are a state lobbying and grant writing firm, and we've worked with the city of Huntington Beach for about 3 years. As the mayor mentioned, in 2017, the legislature and the governor passed a 15-bill affordable housing package. First, I want to start out by what is affordable housing. This term gets thrown around a lot. The definition that the state uses is that the affordable housing cost is not more than 30% of your gross household income. That's the threshold that the state of California has set for affordable housing. How did we get here? Affordable housing is obviously not a new topic in the state of California. Previously, dating back to about the 1950s, there was a process called redevelopment that local governments had where they were able to capture tax increment financing to identify blighted areas in their cities and provide funding to revitalize those areas. Redevelopment was the major mechanism that cities were able to use to bring in businesses and to bring in developers for affordable housing units. In 2011, when Governor Brown came into office, he eliminated redevelopment. There were a few bad actors across the state. The governor saw about 5.5 sitting around in tax increment financing, and he grabbed it from local governments to be able to put to the general fund towards the state's budget. So in one swoop, that tool was taken away from cities. The goal of this affordable housing package was to provide funding, to reduce regulations, to boost construction, and to strengthen existing housing laws. And again, how did we get here? In 2016, there was actually a deal on the table with the governor and legislative leadership, but they couldn't reach the final conclusion. In 2017, there were a number of factors that came into play. The biggest change was that major interest groups came to the table. The Realtors Association, which is a very powerful group up in Sacramento, had been fighting a funding stream for affordable housing for a number of years. Their main concern was that a fee would be put on home sales. Then that would limit home sales, and the Realtors Associations would then suffer as more people would not be buying or selling homes. The deal that was cut this year is that home sales were taken out of the equation. Secondly, the state building trades, a very powerful union group up in Sacramento. They previously opposed the governor's efforts because there were no union level wage standards. This year, prevailing wage was put in as part of the package, so the building trades came to the table. And then finally, the governor wanted something this year. One of the governor's main priorities this year was the extension of the cap and trade program. The cap and trade program was set to expire in 2020, and the one of his highest priorities was to extend that to 2030. The legislature, specifically the Assembly Democrats, used this as leverage, and they went to the governor early in 2017 and said, if you want the cap and trade extension, we want an affordable housing package. The governor agreed. He received his 2/3 votes for a cap and trade extension, and that same day he came out with a press release that said, I will support an affordable housing package, specifically the three main bills that I'll talk about, SB 2, SB 3, and SB 35. So between the governor and the interest groups, that's why 2017 became the year for affordable housing in Sacramento. This next slide is a look at what the affordable housing is projected to do. In order to keep up with the growing population, statistics have shown that California needs at least 180,000 new homes each year. This legislation, even though it was a 15-bill package, it had three main bills attached to it. It's predicted to only add about 14,000 new homes this year. So it is a drop in the bucket, but it is a small drop in the bucket. This is a snapshot of the package. At the beginning of the year, there were 130 affordable housing bills that were introduced in Sacramento. Even though this was a top priority for the legislature, the package came down to the last 3 days of the legislative session, and it really came down to the final hours in Sacramento before the legislature received the votes that they needed to send this to the governor. Part of the reason was because this was the third tax increase that the governor and the legislature voted on this year. SB 1, the gas tax increase, was passed. The cap and trade extension was considered a tax increase and needed a 2/3 vote. And now we had the affordable housing package, which needed a 2/3 vote. The Democrats did have a 2/3 supermajority in both houses last year, but they started to get squeamish towards the end of the year because they had already voted on so many tax increases. Looking ahead to an election year, they were nervous about taking again a third vote that would increase taxes. But ultimately, the package was successful. The first bill, SB 2. This is the permanent funding source that will be ongoing in the state of California. It will impose a fee of $75 on every real estate instrument, paper or notice, required or permitting by law. What this means is any grant, grant deed, deed of trust, refinancing, easement, notice of completion, any real estate documents, with the exception of the actual buying or sale of the home, will have a $75 fee attached to it. There is a cap on each property of $225 per parcel. This is expected to generate about $250 million a year. Who does this impact? It really impacts your investment buyers, your developers, your commercial owners, and people looking to do other things with their property other than buy or sell the property. Now, what happens with the $250 million a year? It's a sort of a tiered process. In 2018, the funding will be split 50% between local governments and the state. Local governments will be given 50% of the funding to update their planning documents, their zoning ordinances, their general plans, community plans, local coastal plans in order to facilitate development and facilitate housing. 50% of the money will stay at the state level to assist on homelessness issues. So to go to projects like rapid rehousing, rental assistance, permanent and transitional housing. In 2019, 70% of that revenue will be allocated for local governments. 30% will stay at the state level for various housing-related programs. Out of that 70% for local governments, 90% of that 70 will be allocated on a formula basis based on the Federal Community Development Block Grant formula. That takes into account targets like population, poverty, overcrowding, which means for the city of Huntington Beach, the city will be entitled to 0.29% of that 90% of 70% of funding. Exactly what that number is remains to be seen based on exactly what this fees generate. This slide gives you a quick snapshot of what that looks like. The next bill, SB 3. This is a one-time source of funding. It is a state general obligation bond of $4 billion. It's a breakdown of $1.5 billion for multifamily housing programs, $1 billion to the existing CalVet home loan program to help provide loans to veterans to purchase homes, and $1.5 billion for various housing-related grant programs. There's about 11 smaller programs at the state level for grants and loans to local governments and nonprofits and other agencies that this money will backfill. This does have to be on the November 2018 ballot and go to a vote of the people. Pending voter approval, then the state will allocate and sell the bond funds to generate the revenue. So the major beneficiaries of this program will be eligible applicants to the about 14 different competitive and low interest loan programs. Next is SB 35, and this was the major streamlining bill up in Sacramento, and this is one of the most complex bills of the package. What this bill essentially says is that if a developer proposes a project on a piece of property that has already been zoned for that type of housing, then the city is not allowed to hold additional meetings to delay the project, provided that the underlying zoning matches and that the developer agrees to a series of things: prevailing wage for construction workers, setting aside low-income development for residents. They have a streamlined processing time to move these projects forward more quickly. This bill really came from the fact that the state government thoroughly believes that locals are not doing their fair share to build housing. And it was really targeted as coastal cities. Coastal cities were the bad actors for this bill that were pointed out as an example of holding up affordable housing and development projects, thus pushing the development inland to the Santa Anas, the Fullertons, but trying to keep caring more about the aesthetics of the coast, not about providing housing for their residents. The state has something called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA, that quantifies the need for housing within each city. Huntington Beach currently has a requirement that you must add 1,353 low-income dwelling units by 2020. That is a state requirement on the city of Huntington Beach. And the city is required to identify sites for that housing in order to comply with their RHNA numbers. The state at this point really does not have a great enforcement mechanism, and that's what this bill was intended to do, to kind of bring down the hammer. It includes a court order component to compel compliance for cities to submit their RHNA numbers and to submit their annual progress reports and the progress they are making towards those RHNA numbers. Last week, the Department of Housing and Community Development published their statewide determination study, which was based on SB 35 and identifies which cities are now flagged for streamlining. Only 13 cities across the state are not subject to streamlining. All other cities are subject to streamlining. There's two different levels. There's a jurisdiction subject to streamlining with a greater than 10% affordability and a 50% affordability. If cities have made insufficient progress towards their RHNA numbers, and if they have failed to submit their progress reports noting the progress towards the RHNA numbers, and Huntington Beach is one of them, they are automatically flagged for streamlining for projects with at least 10% of affordability. So Huntington Beach and 377 of your closest city friends are in this pot where you will be forced to streamline these projects with at least 10% affordability. The other key component of this bill for the city is that it closes a previous loophole for charter cities. Previously, charter cities were not required to submit their annual progress reports. Now, under this bill, charter cities are required to submit that. Looking ahead to 2018, SB 827 is a bill by Mr. Wiener, again the author of SB 35, that has been introduced in Sacramento for this second year of the legislative session that we're currently in. This is really SB 35 on steroids. What it would do is it would allow developers and transit authorities to determine housing densities and parking requirements, taking control fully away from the locals. The author's intent is to bring down the cost of housing by making it easier for developers to build and to focus on building near transit. There has already been a lot of opposition that's come out on this bill. It's a huge takeaway of local control. But again, this is where the state is looking at locals to hold up their fair share of the bargain and come to the table and start to build these affordable housing units. This has not been set for a date for a committee hearing. The opposition, as I mentioned, has started to come to the table, but it will likely be heard in the next probably 3 to 4 weeks up in Sacramento. And then finally, looking ahead to the to what's happening for the rest of this year. As I mentioned, we are in the second year of a 2-year session. We have a shorter timeline this year up in Sacramento. The session's about a month shorter. February 16th is the last day for new bills to be introduced. So at that time, we'll know the full universe of bills that we are dealing with the caveat that bills can be gotten amended at any time throughout the process. So things can always pop up, last minute and come to the table. The dynamics of the legislature, as I mentioned last year, the legislature had a 2/3 supermajority in both houses, which is why we saw 3 major tax increases pass. Because of the recent sexual harassment allegations, the Assembly has lost that 2/3 supermajority and the Senate has lost that 2/3 supermajority. There will be a special election in June for 3 of the 4 seats in the Assembly, and if they take back all 3 of those seats, they will regain their 2/3 supermajority. The Senate, we're still waiting for some investigations to pan out before we know what happens on that side, as well as a recall election that's set in June as well. So the dynamics are not as friendly this year for the Democrats to be able to push forward these proposals without needing Republican support. Secondly, we're in an election year. Policy in Sacramento, major policy in Sacramento tends to happen in a non-election year. So that will be another dynamic that we look at. And then finally, housing fatigue. I believe that the money and funding conversations are really over for this year in Sacramento. Folks are gonna wanna wait for SB 2 and the fee to start to come in to see what type of revenue is generated. Folks will wanna wait for November to see if SB 3, the bond, is passed by the voters. So there's not likely to be any funding legislation on affordable housing passed in Sacramento this year. I think the focus will be more on the policy side. Folks will push back to wait for this package to roll out, to wait for the implementation of SB 35 to roll out. That map you saw was just published last week. So there's a lot of work that the Department of Housing and Community Development is doing on the implementation side, and it takes some time for all of that to start to work before the legislature realizes if they need to fix anything or not. What we're gonna see is, items like rent control. There was a 4-hour hearing in the Capitol in January on a bill to repeal Costa-Hawkins. It was the only bill on the agenda. There were probably more than 1,000 people there speaking in both support and opposition. A lot of attention. Rent control is also one of those easy to digest issues. Everybody understands what rent control is, so it's a very emotional issue for people. The bill failed in committee, but I would not be surprised if it comes back. Again, February 16th is our deadline, so we still have a week for new bills to be introduced, or throughout the process, bills can be gotten amended. So I think that's going to be the direction that you see Sacramento looking at this year on the housing debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Corey. Very enlightening, and we can move on to Heather now for her view from ACCOC.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everybody. My name's Heather Stratman. I am the CEO with the Association of California Cities, Orange County. I'm assuming a lot of folks don't know what that is or who we are, so I do want to just take a minute to introduce you to the organization. The mission of the association is to represent the cities of Orange County on regional public policy issues, and we do this through 3 basic legs. The first is education, the second is policy collaboration, and the third is advocacy. Advocacy for us means that we advocate for the cities here in Orange County, both at the regional level, so that could be within our own county, the County of Orange. It could be regional entities such as AQMD and SCAG. It's also the state of California as well as the federal government. Our membership includes the cities of Orange County, the special districts. I would say nearly all the special districts here in Orange County, with the exception of about 10 very small ones, are members of our organization. The county itself, nonprofits, business and the health community, and higher education institutions. We're governed by a board of directors of 13 sitting mayors and council members from across the county. And we are a nonprofit 501c3. And you can check out our brand new website at accoc.org. This is just a snapshot of what we are focused on in 2018. So you can see that while today I'm here to talk about housing, our our workload and our board of directors has set their eyes very high this year, and we have a lot of work in front of us. But certainly housing and the tentacles of housing and the impacts of what we're dealing with housing have effects on some of these other priorities that we are looking at this year. So there's a lot of synergies between what we do. I want to touch on a few of our sort of efforts that we have launched across the county. And first off, we've taken the approach as the association that the 178 council members across this county need the very best information that we can provide them to make the tough decisions at the dais. And so we offer a tremendous amount of educational foundation opportunities for our council members just to learn. This is an example that we did earlier in 2017 where we loaded up a bus of elected officials and did a half-day tour across the county, looking at different housing developments, learning about the stories, either pro or con for these developments, and we've done this. I think this actually was our second one. We're going to continue to do these in 2018. They're very powerful. Collaboration countywide, we take the approach of a very inclusive process. So when I talk about collaboration, it is not merely the cities sitting around the table and working through tough policy issues. We invite other stakeholders to the table, and we encourage folks to not participate in groupthink, but rather to have facilitated conversations about different perspectives on these issues. And oftentimes that's very hard, but when it's facilitated appropriately, you usually do get the best outcome. So we take great pride in this collaboration and this effort that it takes to bring multiple and diverse stakeholders to the table. Advocacy, AB 346, Corey did a great job going through all of the legislation from last year and into what we're dealing with in 2018. But I want to highlight this bill primarily because this piece of legislation was very much in the spirit of what the association strives to achieve, which is regional collaboration. I am of the perspective, and this is Heather talking, not the association at the moment, that we have 34 cities in Orange County, and those 34 cities are fairly strapped in terms of resources. I don't know in the next decade how our cities are going to be able to grapple with everything that's coming down from the federal and state government, losing funding, additional mandates, the pressures of public safety, homeless. I mean, there is this force that's about to happen to local government. And when elected officials ask me, well, how do we deal with this? I say, think regionally. Look at how you can share services. Look at how you can think outside your jurisdictional boundaries. And AB 346 was an example of that, where we went back in and modified state law to allow cities to use their remaining successor funds from their redevelopment agency days for affordable housing, emergency shelters, permanent supportive housing, and rapid rehousing. But in addition to that, we also said to the state, let our contiguous cities pool their funds, because that's so much more powerful than each of them doing it alone. So we really do try to think in terms of how do we create efficiencies that help our cities with the resources they have while also trying to create more flexibility. So housing. I will say that housing is a major issue that basically transcends every one of our communities. There's not a city in Orange County that isn't grappling with the issue. Lack of supply does impact pricing. Now, we are just an attractive place to live, so we are always going to be more high priced than other areas. We also have a very high, job rate. So, and I'm going to touch on that in a minute. But we don't have the supply, so our costs are even higher than they would be had we been feeding into the system. This impacts our business community and our local economy. We have a strong economy today, but that's at risk if we cannot attract and retain a future workforce who can actually live here. And it impacts the overall health of the county for decades to come. We're seeing this today. Our homeless problem is a direct result of not being able to provide enough affordable housing. Now, I know that there are a lot of other reasons for homelessness, but we don't have adequate housing at affordable prices for folks to live in here in Orange County. And it's not just the homeless that we see on the street. We have 26,000 children in this county alone who are living in housing insecurity. 26,000 children in this county alone. So that is a significant number, and it's growing. And when I say housing insecurity, I mean these are children that are living in garages, couch surfing, sleeping in cars. They don't have a physical address. And obviously, lastly, this impacts transportation. We feel this every day because of sprawl. You know, we have people driving from all over the place to come here to work. I'm going to show a little clip.
Part of the problem is lawmakers, state and local, help create the problem by enforcing these anti-growth policies. Today, home prices are twice the national average, and 70% of people can't afford to buy a home.
California and San Diego as well has a housing crisis. We can't provide housing to our citizens.
For all its claims of being an economic paradise, California is a failure when it comes to affordable housing.
The biggest tragedy of California is that we have stopped building housing for the middle-income folks.
Last year, the cities of Houston and Dallas built more homes than the entire Golden State.
Supply and demand works. People want to be here. We're not accommodating them with new housing, and so the cost of the housing goes up.
Who's to blame? Current residents don't want more traffic. Environmentalists oppose growth. Politicians fear both.
We started the process in 2010 on the planning.
7 years later, Newland Sierra is still trying to build new homes near San Diego. A similar project in LA battled environmental lawsuits for 20 years.
Very often these lawsuits are not won, but it extends the amount of time it takes to do the development, and in development, time really is money.
But with homes hitting $600,000 for a starter, opponents face a backlash.
It stands for Yes in My Backyard.
This mom started a YIMBY group to counter those who say, not in my backyard, to every project.
Our long-term growth and prosperity is absolutely fundamentally dependent upon having housing that folks can afford.
But because that housing does not exist, 1 in 10 residents are considering leaving, and 2 million age 25 and above, Sandra, already have.
So that's just a little snippet. You know, Orange County isn't the only county dealing with this. This is largely a urban coastal issue in California. And it sort of reinforces some of the thoughts that I have put together today. Regional housing needs. Our unemployment rate is at 4%. It's hovering there, very strong. You know, while I know we hear a lot of statistics about people leaving the state in drones, our numbers are not necessarily telling us that. We have nearly 3.2 million people in Orange County, and the amount of people that leave on a yearly basis, if you look at the last 5 years, are being replaced with people coming here. So we're netting out. We're not losing people very quickly. Housing supply in Orange County, obviously the limited supply causes competition and drives up prices. Families have to turn to the Inland Empire, which causes major transportation problems, and that is driving up prices as well. The average time for an Orange County worker to get to the office, 53.7 minutes. I would add about 40 sometimes for me. I live in South Orange County and drive into North County. It's fairly difficult on a regular basis. The concern with the county-to-county commuting, this was just a little quote out of the Orange County Register from last year. I think we feel this when you see your workers driving an hour each way. It does put a strain on them. It puts a strain on families and on our roads. Just to give you a sense, there's over 18,000 that commute just from San Diego County daily, another 34,000 that commute from San Bernardino County, and 50,000 that commute from Riverside County daily. So that is impacting our roads. We pay for that. We suffer from this sprawl. So why aren't we building? Obviously, there's a very, very strong NIMBY movement out there. Our elected officials have shown some lack of political will on this issue, to be honest. There has been a lack of funding, as Corey mentioned, in 2013 when the governor removed redevelopment agencies. That left major funding gaps for cities and developers to try to figure out how to fill. Land availability. We're running out of land here in Orange County. The land we have is scarce, and we have to look at different ways to address land use and transportation with our very limited supply. and overuse and abuse of environmental regulations. The consequences of this is, again, this lack of affordable housing. And when we say affordable, you know, to afford a medium-priced income, $158,000, that's a fairly sizable salary, and not necessarily everyone is meeting those wages. And so you can see the problem, because of those costs, just continues to exacerbate itself. This is a clip, a quote from the Legislative Analyst's Office. They're a nonpartisan entity in Sacramento that basically weighs in on major policy issues. This is just a quick quote from them, but it underscores what's happening in California today because of our housing crisis. And it's such an umbrella issue to our communities as a whole that the trickling down effects are fairly significant. And I think we're only just beginning to see them, to be honest. I think the next decade will be even more severe. So talking about some strategies, engage the business community. This is something that I think Orange County historically has a very strong business community that comes together, that engages when they feel like, you know, things are of most important to them. And the business community is engaging. I think they're at the point where they're saying, this isn't working for us anymore. And they're engaging with folks like ACCOC and the cities and the Orange County Business Council and other stakeholders. Engage our millennials. Orange County is incredibly blessed with our higher education institutions, both our community colleges and our university systems. But we're losing those students because we don't have anywhere for them to live. And that means basically we're draining our own knowledge base. Those are people that we want to keep here, attract, and keep here so that our job and our economy countywide stays as strong as it is today. Those are also folks, those young millennials, that we want them to invest in our communities. Just like we all have, we want to give them that opportunity. I think we need to do more educating versus talking about anecdotal stories. Everybody has an anecdotal story, but when you actually start to analyze the data and look at facts, I think some of those emotions fall off the table and we get down to actually, how can we address our problem? How can we have a discussion about this as communities, as stakeholders in our communities, who all of us care about our communities, but we have to engage in a discussion of just, you know, it's not always no and it's not always yes. It's coming together and saying, how do we make this work for the health of this county long term? Great land availability. I have the fortune of working with Mr. Ruane on sort of an emerging issue, which is this reuse of retail space in our communities. Because of internet sales and the very rapid decline of brick and mortar retail, we will, as communities, have the opportunity to engage in how we want to reuse that land use. And I think that's a real opportunity for communities to decide what they want to be and who they are in the coming decades. And I am, you know, the support of this NIMBY movement. It is picking up and it's growing rather rapidly. I think you have these millennials who are saying, no, we have voices and we want to be heard, and, you know, we want to contribute to this conversation. And that NIMBY movement is really a rise of the millennials. And then again, this is always my pitch, but think regionally. I don't think 34 cities can combat these issues alone. I think we have to work together. I think we have to think differently than we've ever thought before. And I think there's a real opportunity to cut costs, to create efficiencies, and to do better than we've done if we focus on regional efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. You painted a very good, vivid picture of really why Sacramento reacted the way that they did. So not building, not meeting RENA really caused Sacramento to really jump in and take control. We've got a couple of questions. We can have a little bit of discussion, and then we can take some questions from the audience. And when we do that, I would ask that if you come to the podium just like you would at a city council meeting. It's going to be a few minutes, so we can get you on the microphone, everybody can hear you. One of the things that Heather touched on was job creation, and one of the things I do, I'll give you some disclosure here, I'm also involved and participate in the ACCOC, serving as co-chair of the Jobs and Economic Development Committee. And with unemployment at 4% and in decline, I don't have a whole lot to do on the Jobs and Economic Development Committee because there isn't much job creation and involvement that we really need to do. So we're still alive, we still meet and talk. But with unemployment at 4%, I would imagine it's probably lower for college educated, maybe in the 2.5% or 3%. Those are typically the numbers I see. We were trying to get Amazon, and everybody knows about Amazon HQ2 and Huntington Beach, Long Beach partnership and proposal for that. And I'll ask anybody that can answer that. I know we didn't make the short list, and is not making the short list, where are we going to find 50,000 employees? Because if unemployment is at 4%, where do you find 50,000 people unless you bring them from someplace else? Because I know there are some cities now that are complaining about Amazon because the threat of poaching talent. Is that a real threat? And it's kind of housing related, I know, but.
That works. Well, I think there's two things going on, even though the unemployment rate is historically low. The type of jobs that are coming into Orange County, the type of jobs are leaving are vastly different. So whether or not Amazon locates in a community, part of how it's linked to the housing crisis is you need, for a community to sustain itself, you need high quality, high paying jobs to support the economy here. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't that long ago, Orange County was based in part and built in part with a very thriving aerospace industry, including Huntington Beach. Mm-hmm. Those were very good jobs, they were very stable, and so it is, I think it is a real threat to the extent other communities, whether that's North Carolina, whether that's the Inland Empire, are becoming more attractive for business location, they will get the higher paying jobs. And having a high cost housing market is not going to help in any kind of competitiveness, because those large corporations are much more mobile than they were 20 years ago. So I think the unemployment rate masks what's going on also on the gap between income and housing costs.
Okay. Corey, you mentioned Charter City. Why aren't we exempt from some of these bills?
The state wants to bring everybody to the table, and they wanted to get rid of all of the exemptions, all of the special favors, all of the carve-outs that had happened previously, and really make this universal across the board for everyone in the state of California.
How did Marin County?
Well, there's always politics.
Yeah.
So when SB2, the 75 real estate transaction fee bill, came to the floor, when the speaker called for the vote, in order to get a 2/3 vote in the assembly, you need 54 votes out of 80. And the speaker called for the vote, and they had 52. One Republican assembly member, Brian Mayshine from San Diego, voted in favor of the bill. So there were 3 assembly members that were holding out. Sabrina Cervantes from the Riverside area, Assemblymember Nazarian from the LA area, and Assemblymember Levine from the Marin County area. And Sabrina Cervantes from Riverside is in one of the most targeted seats in the state of California, meaning that she's a Democrat that holds the seat now. It's a swing seat. Republicans are looking at it very closely in this next election to be able to take that seat back. Assemblymember Nazarian and Assemblymember Levine at that time were called into the principal's office. Speaker Rendon called both members into his office. He needed 2 more votes, and the games began. Assemblymember Nazarian had an energy bill in a policy committee in the Senate that had died a couple weeks earlier that he was very interested in moving, and Assemblymember Levine was very interested in extending Marin County's exemption. So I cannot say that they were directly correlated to their votes in support of SB2, but 2 things happened for both of those members, and SB2 passed the legislature. So for the Marin County exemption, there was a bill passed in 2014 that allows low-income developers like to build large affordable housing units because they are more financially viable than if they build a smaller unit. The Marin County exemption limits the size of affordable housing units to 3 stories tall. This has obviously caused a lot of conversations across the state. Marin is one of the wealthiest communities in the state, if not the country. They're one of the most segregated communities in the state, if not the country. There's always a lot of conversations about why Marin is getting these, special treatment when you have communities across the Bay, San Francisco, Oakland, that are, doing all of this affordable housing building. But Assemblymember Levine used his leverage, and he was able to extend that exemption until 2028 to limit the size of affordable housing developments. But I will say that Marin County is still must comply with SB 35. So all of the conditions of SB 35 with streamlining still apply in Marin County.
Okay. You spoke a little bit, this question is for any of you guys. On RENA, we had our last housing element, general plan update, had 1,353 units in it. And I think right now we're about 400 or so deficient. Is there any speculation on what the next round of RENA might be, since we just completed our general plan update and housing element, and we're probably due to hear from Housing and Community Development soon?
Maybe I'll just kick it off and turn it over. But here in Orange County, we have an organization called the Orange County Council of Governments. It's the sub-agency to the Southern California Association of Governments, which is the metropolitan planning organization for the 6 counties in Southern California. My last discussions on upcoming RENA was that Orange County would probably be in a fairly good place. And it's significant because we use an institution through Cal State Fullerton, the Center for Demographic Research. We're the only independent demographic addition to the SCAG projections for the entire 6 counties. And that's powerful because it allows us to justify our data. So I think that we will not get beat up on in this next RENA, but we're watching it very, very closely to make sure that Orange County is appropriately represented and that our elected officials at SCAG are making sure that our numbers hold tight.
That's encouraging news. And RENA, Regional Housing Needs Assessment, is that a building mandate, or is that just zoning?
Right now, it's zoning. Yeah. I believe it is. We are in the era that it will become a mandate.
That's what I think. That was in part of SB 827's bill?
Correct.
Yeah. And doesn't SB 827 also have a minimum height? From what I read, it was 45 feet minimum.
Correct.
Which was to maximize density, and that's coming from Sacramento, coming from Senator Scott Wiener.
SB 827 really takes it to the next level of taking away local control. That's really where some members in Sacramento want to go if local governments don't start to step up and build based on the package that just happened with the funding, with the streamlining. They want to see action, or else that's the next step the state will go in. And
a transit line could include a bus route, not
Correct.
Just a train, or, yep. What about this is a question for anybody too. What about the accessory dwelling unit legislation passage? Would permits and construction help us with our RENA and maybe making us exempt from SB 35 or even SB 827 or something like that? Does that inventory count?
I don't know if it counts.
I think my understanding is that unless they are specifically affordable units, it will not count. Mm-hmm. It's an important part of the solution to have, and accessory dwelling units, for the audience's benefit, is where you're allowed to add a unit above a garage, a traditional back unit, and the state is really seeing that as part of the solution, is to use that. But unless they're restricted to affordable, they're not going to count against your affordable requirements.
And I guess my last question for the panel is, and this is for anybody here, what would be your best definition of affordable housing? And I know that it's kind of a moving target. And when we talk about market rate apartments with affordable units, we're talking about building market rate apartments or houses or whatever that have affordability, as an alternate to the $600,000, $700,000 starter home. But affordable housing mandates, there's some belief that these are Section 8 or HUD or and not indexed to the median income. And I think our median income now is $89,000, and I think San Francisco it's up to 106 or something. And so, any one of you, I guess, want to address that?
Sure. What I thought would be helpful was we provided for the audience two handouts of developments here in Orange County that show the income levels. So at usually there are two levels of income. One is 60% of the median income that you mentioned. So that's about $52,000. This is for a family of four. This is not for an individual. And extremely low income, which is really what the state is trying to promote, is about $31,000. So these are basically apartments, multifamily homes. And what is challenging about it is they need to be built. Most new housing is built as a tax credit funded development. They need to have similar or quality of standards, interior and exterior. They are actually, you can't build these by simply not doing things you would normally do for an apartment complex. So that's what makes it the most daunting when you're in a high cost, high construction area and you have to keep the rents low. So that's kind of the population. Some would refer to the 30% as the working poor. Residents in our developments, except in special needs cases, are working. There's some who need, who are also going, let's say some group that's dealing with homelessness and the like, but what we're talking about here is affordable housing and people who might be working in the retail sector in the community. And that's the two projects we gave, the residents, some work actually in the adjacent resident retail areas.
Any closing comments? You ready for some questions from the audience? Anybody with a question like to come up to the podium? Good morning, Mr. Bauer.
Hi, my name is Ralph Bauer. I'm a long-term resident of Huntington Beach. Recently, the City Council won a lawsuit as well as won the appeal for building a certain number of affordable housing in Huntington Beach. In the face of that, I wonder how Huntington Beach is going to address the issue of affordable housing, because we're woefully short of affordable housing in Huntington Beach, and part of the lack of affordable housing contributes to the homeless problems. I wonder if a comment on anybody on how does Huntington Beach address the issue of affordable housing in the face of a recent lawsuit.
Well, I think the purpose of this town hall was really to demonstrate how Sacramento is going to take control. And that's really the message. The message is that Sacramento is going to take control for us. And how we respond to that, I don't know. That's a policy question, and we really can't be answering any policy questions today.
Well, I don't want to get into a back and forth debate. However, with the and I'm not particularly partisan in either direction, but the partisan issue reality is that the Democrats either have or have close to a supermajority, and so the tendency is to dictate to cities to deal with this issue, which I'm sure is of concern to you. But the reason they do that in part is because there's a lack of affordable housing. So it seems to be that the city of Huntington Beach should develop a strategy for dealing with affordable housing. So my question is, what's your strategy to deal with affordable housing? Not just opposing Sacramento, but maybe coming up with a plan of some kind.
That's also a policy question, and since we don't have a quorum here, we probably should not touch on that topic.
I'm encouraging you to develop a strategy for
I understand.
affordable housing.
I wrote it down.
Instead of filing lawsuits to prevent affordable housing, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Bauer.
Thank you.
May I just comment?
Yes, Heather has a response for you, Mr. Bauer.
This is not specific to Huntington Beach, but I just more throw out strategies generally for the cities, which, one thing that we can start to look at, because it's a supply issue, is our senior housing. So, many of us grew up with our parents in these large homes, and then we leave and our parents stay there. And we need our seniors to start downsizing into smaller homes to open up that supply. That's just a natural supply. We don't even have to build anything. That's just getting people into that movement of what's next. And usually single story homes. I'm trying to do that with my parents right now. So I would also say that cities like Huntington Beach, who have lobbyists, can aggressively go after grant funding to close those gaps that the redevelopment agencies can no longer fulfill. And I'm not making a political statement at all about the November bond that will be on the ballot for the $4 billion. But I do believe when it has veterans written into the title, it has a fairly strong chance of passing. We don't know polling yet, but it's coming. And that's a significant amount of money. We haven't had housing money since Prop 1C in 2006, and we need to be able to help fill those funding gaps. And so cities will have that opportunity. So it's not, I would say it's not a silver bullet approach. It's a lot of things that we can do, tweaks in the system to create flexibility for cities, look at funding, how do we get more strategic as a county. One thing that we have been talking about collectively as a stakeholder group is the way that funds roll from the state and the federal government to our counties for housing usually kind of pits jurisdictions against each other. Very unlike transportation funding, which is more regional in nature, water funding, which is more regional in nature. Why haven't we kind of progressed to this regional thinking in terms of housing? Because it's really a county-wide issue. I know we all feel like it's our city's issue. And we all get to attend so many council meetings where you get that sentiment, but really this is a regional issue. And so we have to think about how to do these things differently. And I think the state, the Housing and Community Development at the state and their director, Ben Metcalf, is on a statewide listening tour, and we are plugging away at him, which is we need the state to think differently. Don't just throw these mandates on us and expect that cities can just, at the whim, change the direction. We need help. We need the tools and the resources to actually make this work. Otherwise, we just basically kind of do this.
That's a good point. You reminded me of something, Heather, and again, this is for any of the three of you. We know Prop 13 is, in my opinion, sacrosanct, and there's some discussion about split rolls and all kinds of other things. One of the tools to help seniors, and I'm getting there pretty close. I don't want to admit how close, but it's a couple decades anyway. That Prop 13 is portable. So if you're over 55, you get the one-time portability of taking your tax base with you to a like-sized investment or even a lower investment. What is the stat? I don't remember the bill number, but there's another bill that's in process that allows a senior to, let's say you have a Huntington Beach $900,000 house and you want to move to Rancho Mirage and a $1.5 million house. But you want to take your $900,000 tax base on the house you bought for $75,000 in 1979, and so you can take that tax base up to the $900,000, and then you pay your up-to-date taxes on the $900,000 to $1.5 million. Do I understand that correctly?
You do.
And what's the status of that?
You do. I believe it's an initiative right now.
Okay.
So it's,
okay.
It has not qualified for the ballot. It's going through the initiative process. Okay. The split roll as well, which would only affect the business side, not the residential side, is also going through the initiative process. I don't believe that one they've started to collect signatures yet, but there may be some Prop 13 measures on this November election. That leads me to a follow-up question. Would the Prop 13 split roll doesn't apply to residential, which would be single-family homes, but what about commercial for rent apartment complexes? Would it apply to that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you, go ahead, Heather.
I just want to clarify on the initiative. So right now, if you're over 55, there are select counties in the state where you can move your property tax. This initiative would allow anyone over 55 to do that across any county. So it would basically create consistency across the state, and it's being sponsored by the Association of Realtors, I believe.
And that's a very good example of a regional approach, really a statewide approach. So instead of having islands of legislation you can transport your tax base to the retirement community of your choice. Questions from the audience? Yes, Mr. Miller.
Yes. First off, thank you, Mayor Posey, for doing this town hall. I love the ideas and some of the strategies, Heather, you talked about. And here's an anecdotal story. We just lost a very talented millennial to Austin, Texas. Obviously, affordable housing was a big deal. I think she's looking to get married, and you do the math, it just doesn't work. So I like the idea about engaging millennials for those solutions. We know that the wheels of government sometimes turn slowly, and when we talk about engaging a certain group of our community or in our region, that may take some time. So help us understand what that means and some of the solutions and how all that's going to work. Thanks.
So we at the association have been thinking about that for some time, and we, because of our partnership with both Cal State Fullerton and UCI, we've started a process of bringing them in, because really, you know, we want to keep those graduating students, and it's all of our university and community college systems across the county. We really need to bring them to the table and ask them, you know, what are they looking for? Because we see all sorts of different studies where millennials want to live in a downtown and walk everywhere and don't want cars. But then we hear millennials who want to have want to start a family and want a backyard, and they want a little bit more space. So what I would say is that I think we need to engage the millennials in a broader discussion about sort of, you know, how do you help us influence this process in a positive way? Because what I think is that, you know, they're just the ones that are entering the job force. I don't even know that they know. So we have to basically create and facilitate a forum for that to happen. And we're looking to our higher education institutions to help us do that and bring them to the table.
Any other audience questions? Yes.
Good morning. My name is Elvista Lampley, and I'm a longtime citizen here in Huntington Beach. Matter of fact, since '88. And my concern is that my grandchildren will not have housing in this city. My son and his wife, they both have good jobs. She's a landscape engineer. He's a professional. But together, they don't make the median income of $85,000. So I'm just hoping that the community come together and realize that this is a problem for all of us. And one of my suggestions here, because I'm also a CEO and founder of a local nonprofit, White Lotus Homes for Our Homeless. And our main purpose is to strive and fight and advocate for senior citizens, especially women and children. They are our priority, that they can be able to get housing. Me, myself, I was fortunate to come here and buy a nice home in the Huntington Park tract, but with the downfall of the market, I lost my home. But I also am educated enough that if I get it once and God is in the picture, I can get it again. But I also realize that it's getting harder to do it again. So we as a community, we need to come together. And one suggestion, I'm also renewing my broker's license, and my expertise is commercial real estate and affordability housing. I've been in contact with Orange County. They're waiting on proposals. So my suggestion to you guys, and I've learned so much today, we need to collaborate, form communities and committees that can work on real estate syndication from our citizens, our people here that have an interest in reinvesting in this community. That's my only suggestion. We need to have a plan, and we can start by inviting everybody in that says, you know what, I want to have a part. Before we offer it to the outside, we need to let the people on the inside have a first right of refusal. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Kelly?
Good morning. My name is Debbie Killey. I live in Huntington Beach, and I work here, and I love being here. I'm raising my family here. And I'm a member of the forgotten generation, Gen X.
Who?
Yeah. And I heard an idea the other day, and I thought it was pretty good, and I wondered if maybe there was some legislation in the Capitol or being thought about. So for my generation, where we were lucky enough to get in 2000 and buy a starter home, we're now still in those tiny homes, and we're not able to go up because of the property taxes. So I was just wondering, we're talking about age 55 and older gets this tax credit, but for my husband and I, and we're raising our daughter, we're still in a small home because we can't afford the $1 million home across the street. So I wondered if that tax break was going to happen because we could afford the house payment, not the tax.
I don't see that coming. And I'm a Generation X too, and I think, there's not that many of us, so hi. But no, I don't see that coming right now. I think the focus is really trying to get our senior population in downsizing and opening up those homes, which is a supply issue, and hopefully helps, alleviate some of that cost pressure. It's not going to alleviate it all, but it would help.
It's all about us right now. Meaning baby boomers. Yes, Ms. Sameta.
Good morning, Lynn Sameta. And I just want to ask, I guess, of ACCOC, as regional leaders that you are in helping all of us, have you heard any efforts regarding trying to challenge this legislation coming out of Sacramento, which really is a usurpation of local control? I think there certainly are constitutional challenges that could be made, that they are, tramping on our rights as local communities to, have a say in our affairs and how our land use is carried out. And so that could be a regional effort that cities could get together and challenge this type of legislation. Have you heard anything, or what can you say about that?
Not yet. I think one, and Corey articulated, we're sort of waiting to see what happens a little bit with this legislative session. I will say that, if we look back over the governor's almost 8 years, we went from more local control, pre-Governor Brown to today. It's a very centric state system and growing more so that way. Our state agencies have never had the power that they have today. I think it will continue in that trend. It's sort of the pendulum swing. But what I would say, in absence of lawsuits, I do think not the fight, I wouldn't want to call it a fight, but I think where the discussion needs to start to evolve is we have to show up with solutions. We have to show up with solutions. If all we say is no, this will continue to be jammed down us, and it will get worse. I said yesterday in a meeting Mike and I were in that if we don't deal with our homeless problem, they're going to tell us how to do it, and we're going to not like that as well. So what I think that we have to do is come together as cities and say, okay, we don't like this, but here's a solution that we're willing to come to the table with. And I don't know that we've done that before, and I think that we really have to step up as local communities and come together and say, okay, we don't like this state, well, here's what we do like, and this is what would work.
And I don't see why those two things can't happen at the same time. I agree with you that we should be coming up with solutions that are good for our communities. But I see this legislation very much as taking away the opportunity for civic engagement and free speech even, that cities, that there's no more environmental review in certain cases, so that the citizens don't have a say, and I see that as somewhat problematic. So, thank you.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Ms. Sameta, and that's what the purpose of this town hall was to really illustrate what's happening in Sacramento and how Sacramento has called this a matter of statewide concern. And really the first 15 bills from Sacramento, you could almost characterize it as the first shot across the bow. And if you read SB 827, which is authored by the same San Francisco State Senator as SB 35, it's almost a doubling or tripling down of SB 35. There are some hurdles with SB 35, notwithstanding prevailing wage, but like the panel very skillfully articulated, this is really the first start, and we have to be conscious of that. So I don't want to get too deep in any policy, so we'll keep it. Any other audience questions? Yes, Ms. Levasseur. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Or close enough?
Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, panel members. Thank you for opening up this public question and comment period. My name is Catherine Levasseur, and I'm a 19-year resident of Huntington Beach. And my husband and I, I'm also a founding member of the Huntington Beach Short-Term Rental Alliance, and we are in support of short-term rental. It's helping us stay in our home. And hearing you talk, Heather, today about the millennials and attracting millennials, I read before where architects are now designing new housing that accommodates home sharing. And that is a way for millennials to actually get a foot in the door to get that supplemental income that would allow them to buy in Huntington Beach. And that's kind of the way that they're traveling these days. But from a personal perspective, short-term rental affects all age groups. So you could have someone 90 years old, or you could have a millennial straight out of college or still in college. So, and also the benefit of the taxation for the city. So my question is, what kind of priority is short-term rental alternatives, and what are you doing?
Oh, go ahead.
Let me answer part of that, and then I'll defer to the experts for the details. But from, I'm involved in a lot of other things than just city council. And I've said this before, in fact, all of the city council members do more than just show up every other Monday and vote. We typically serve on 8 or 10 or 12 other boards and organizations. And my particular interest is in legislative affairs, and I serve on several committees and boards following legislative affairs. And part of that interest requires me to keep track of what's happening. And one of the things that's really kind of piqued my interest addresses the very thing that you brought up, and that is the accessory dwelling unit legislation, and it's really fostered a cottage industry. And there is a cottage industry of ADUs development, and they're actually contractors that are calling themselves, the accessory dwelling unit contractor and contractors for accessory dwelling units, and it's really a new industry. And with locked out, it's a lockout. You add onto the garage, it's got a separate entrance, it's got a separate kitchen, it's got a separate bath, and you can rent it for a day, a week, a month, a year, 2 years, or whatever. So I think you'll see more of that. You certainly see it in San Jose. San Jose is really where it's catching on fire because of the real acute housing crisis in the Bay Area. Just as a number, and this is about a year old, but the Bay Area was creating 7 jobs for every house that they built. In Orange County, I think we were 4 or 4.5, something like that. And the gold standard is 1.5. So every 1.5 jobs you create, you have to have a house. So the accessory dwelling unit is really catching fire there. I don't know, maybe you guys want to expand a little bit upon that, or?
I was only going to touch on the short-term rental issue. We are in the process of developing a countywide short-term rental model ordinance with a menu of options for cities, depending if you're coastal or inland and other factors. And we're just kicking off that process this month, and so I can follow up with you. But we are really focused on the operation side of the short-term rentals and how to make that work well for cities and the communities.
And from the Sacramento perspective, there have been a few bills on short-term rentals, also focused on the operation side and mostly, how you can keep the neighbors happy and create something that works for everyone. So discussion has been there, but not quite to the level that you're talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Mr. Kalmick heading towards the podium. Mr. Kalmick.
Hello, thank you guys very much for having us today. As one of the few millennials, I think, in the audience, I can speak with a little bit of...
You're on the older side of millennials.
I'm the first one, I think.
I would say you're a Gen Xer.
I'm a zillennial, technically. So okay. I graduated from high school in 2000. But my question is, as a planning commissioner for the city, I've obviously seen quite a bit of public hearing on these issues. And one of the issues in Huntington Beach specifically is that 90-something odd % of our housing is single family. Does high-density housing from a Sacramento standpoint does affordable housing have to be high density? And then the nexus of transportation and affordable housing is also something that's a big concern. If we're going to have to, I don't think we can build our way out of this per se. And if we potentially were able to convert some of our single-family homes into slightly, couple, dual-family homes to offset our affordable housing numbers, how does transportation play into that? Because I've talked with a lot of residents, and it's not necessarily the high-density housing, it's not necessarily the people, it's their cars. And what's the nexus there? Because Orange County Transportation Authority, which I sit on their advisory committee for, has slowly pulled our buses out. We have a bus stigma as well in town. So how do we deal with not even necessarily potentially increasing density, but increasing population, the organic increase, and moving people around our community? Because a big concern is I want to be able to pull in to the store I want to go to, pull right up in front, and not pay for parking. So what's Sacramento's take, or are they just going to say you have to build all this and figure out transportation after the fact?
On the affordable housing question, affordable housing does not have to be high density, but I believe from the developer standpoint, that's typically the most affordable, is to build a large unit and then you have 10, 20% dedicated to your affordable housing, which is why we've seen that more frequently across the state, but that's not a Sacramento requirement. On the transit side, the state has been very focused on decreasing greenhouse gas emissions and the climate change initiatives and enacting SB2 legislation from a couple years ago. So they're trying to tie all of the major state initiatives to that sort of message, which is why you see affordable housing and transit together, because if you can build by transit, if you can have bus stops, if you can have trains, you get people out of their cars, you get them walking, you're reducing your effect on the environment. And to a point Heather made earlier, is there's a lot of money in Sacramento for grant opportunities for that type of development, for those types of trail projects, that type of, keep everybody in the same spot so they're not using their car and they're walking and biking. So that overarching theme is something from Sacramento that you see across the board on all policy that they're really considering.
Right. On the two things on the density. No, that works. So two quick things on the density issue, which is usually the primary concern in a community. It's more than likely, workforce housing, affordable housing, special needs housing, seniors, is mostly going to be multifamily apartments. I think the tragedy has been that some of those that were done 20 years ago weren't done well. They're not properly managed, the parking's not managed. Parking problems are not only, when you actually think about the reality of it, aren't just an issue of parking spaces. The fact is, if everyone is using their garage for storage, that is as big an issue as parking. So whether it's affordable or not, it's of tantamount concern multifamily units are properly managed. In fact, in the jurisdictions we work in, they probably are as concerned about management as they are about anything else but design. But I do think design can be done well. There are some opportunities to create first-time homebuyer opportunities in a single-family setting, which would be a great opportunity for a community like this. But I do think, and then the second point on where Sacramento's clearly going, most of where they're headed is to actually reduce parking requirements. And some of that is arbitrary. They believe by putting things near transit, you won't need a car. What we're seeing is actually, with the millennials and others, less car dependency. In fact, many would prefer not to own a car with Uber and Lyft. So there is, some believe 5-10 years from now there'll be actually empty parking structures, and how should we plan for that and do an adaptive reuse? So, but I think right now, where you're trying to make sure you're not lowering community standards in the interest of affordability, I think parking is still a major concern. But I can share with you that you're gonna see a radical shift in how people get around, particularly millennials, but increasingly others, and you're going to see that expand. And the autonomous vehicles are actually, instead of a future, many of the new models are semi-autonomous now. So there's a lot of innovation, and part of it's going to be impact higher density. But I would say no matter what policy and issues are being pursued, I think the management is often overlooked by a lot of communities as the factor, and you can tell 10 years later which whether it's market or affordable, which development has been properly managed, maintained. It's all about strong man. It's not necessarily about cost. It's about people really knowing that practice.
I would like to chime in. A few things. I will just say candidly, the state's trying to get us out of our cars. They have been for years, and they keep making headway. So let's just be clear what the state's goal is. They want us out of our cars. And for a county like Orange County, where we don't have transit, excuse me, other than bus rapid transit, we don't have a metro line or, some of these other opportunities that, let's say, LA and San Diego has. We have to think about it differently. So when when the housing package was going through last year, we were doing all of these meetings saying, look, guys, we understand what your goals are, but in Orange County, we need to think about this differently. You want to keep our job market strong, then we have to think about the transportation and mobility issues differently here, because we're just different, and that is what it is. And so we're going to keep pushing on all of that because, this mobility issue is significant. And OCTA, I'll give them credit. They are doing, I think, some interesting demonstration in pilot programs in communities where buses have been eliminated, but they've instituted a voucher program, for seniors in San Clemente so that they can get to doctor's appointments and otherwise. And I just agree with Mike. I think the future is, the technology in transportation is going to be really helpful for us, because I don't know really else how we deal with it here in Orange County without, we don't have BART, and we're not going to,
right,
or anytime soon.
And as the final point would be that we have OC Flex starting in July here in Northern Huntington. That'll be kind of a hotel shuttle that's accessible through an app, which I think will be an interesting data set. But with a median age of 42.9 for our city and low smartphone penetration into that older demographic, I think we're going to have to come up with something unique, because we have 3 bus routes essentially left throughout Huntington Beach, and if building affordable housing on a transit corridor allows you to usurp all local control, we're going to have a big issue, because one bus running every 30 minutes is not transit. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? None? And one question that you kind of touched on density, and maybe this question is for any of the 3. For the audience, could you explain how the density bonus works, what the density bonus is, and how that ties into affordable housing? So anybody?
So density bonus is basically a provision that as part of prior state legislation, but local government, cities, have in their ordinances an incentive for affordable housing. And so to the extent you provide affordable housing, generally you can have a density increase. It might be 25%, it might be a different level. In some cities, they prioritize family for density bonus, while senior units have different provisions. But in essence, you get higher density automatically for providing affordable housing. And that's a very powerful incentive, I think, for people to try to deal with the cost of affordable. It's generally going to be more cost effective if you have more density on a site. And in the case of Orange County, that's generally going to be true. There's urban areas where it can be very expensive to do anything over a certain density level. So it's a more of an incentive-based program, and I think cities are fairly comfortable with it. It's in place, so I think it's a fairly standard practice.
Okay. Just wanted to illuminate the people that are here that may not understand how that works. Any other questions before we wrap up? Seeing none, I just want to thank Michael Ron from National Corps, Corey Williams from Townsend, and Heather from ACCOC, also known as Association of California Cities of Orange County, and you for coming and participating. Thank you very much.